You are listening to the Primitive Intelligence Podcast, episode 607, The Greater Phenomenon, Is It All Connected? Now, before I get into the episode, I want to take a second and thank those of you who have taken the time to tell me your stories of your experiences and all this stuff. It is awesome. I love hearing them. And if you haven't sent your information yet, you haven't sent a story, if you had an experience of any kind, if it's a Bigfoot or a UFO sighting, maybe a haunting or ghost or anything like that, and you want to share this story, you can contact me, Kurt, at podcast@primitiveintelligence.com. You can send me your information, your story. Tell me as much of it or as little of it as you would like. We can keep it anonymous. It doesn't matter to me. I just want to hear your story. And I would love to share that. And I'd like to get an episode together with listener stories. So, and again, I understand that not everybody who has had an experience wants to talk about it. And a lot of times that's mostly because even if you've had the experience, you don't even really believe that you've had the experience. And you don't think anybody's going to believe you. So I'm more than willing to keep that information anonymous and just share the story if you want to get it out. So please reach out if you want to. Again, that is podcast@primitiveintelligence.com. This week, though, we're going to talk about the phenomenon as a whole and my thoughts on it. So without any further ado, episode 607 of the Primitive Intelligence Podcast starts now. So after last week's episode with the black-eyed kids, I was like, I'm going to get this awesome story together. I'm going to have it ready to go. And I started with two separate stories and a couple ideas, and none of it went anywhere. It just was a big dead end. So over the weekend, I was talking with some friends. We got into the topic of what I've been covering on a podcast for the past couple weeks, and it kind of pointed me down a different avenue. So I started looking into another kind of related to black-eyed kids topic, but it's going to take a lot more research. And unfortunately, this topic, the stories are all relatively short, not a lot of detail in them. So trying to figure out how to work that in. But then yesterday, I found this really cool book that I want to cover, but I didn't want to rush it and try to squeeze that in. I was finding it yesterday and trying to do it today. So I decided this week, I'm going to talk about what I call the greater phenomenon. And you may have heard me say this before on other episodes, and I want to kind of explain what that is and why I kind of believe it. And I think it's important that people, whether you believe in the paranormal or supernatural or cryptids or any of this stuff, or you're skeptical of it, that you have your own belief of it, good or bad, indifferent, doesn't matter. And I think they're probably all valid, because I think this is a very personal phenomenon. So I don't think that anybody should get offended by people who say they don't believe, or people who don't believe shouldn't be mocking people who do, because there's so many things in this universe that we don't understand, in this reality that we don't understand, that I don't think any of us have it completely right. I think we can all learn from each other. So I'm going to put my ideas out there, and if they make sense to you, that's great. If they don't, then, we'll move on, and next week will be a new episode. But I'm going to talk about it, and we're going to go from there. I'm also very coffee powered today. So first of all, I have no notes for this episode. This is just all completely, I'm shooting from the hip here. Because a lot of this is just my thoughts on what could possibly be going on. I grew up in a house, and I know I've covered some of these topics in other episodes, but I'm going to kind of give a little bit of a background without too much detail for sake of time. But I grew up in a house that when I was a kid, now I'm 51. I lived out on the edge of the Pocono Mountains here in Pennsylvania. And back then there was not a lot around. And the house I grew up in at that time, back in the 70s was 100 years old. So it already had some history, and the property that it sat on had some history. And I'll start with the house first, but it was, like I said, 100 years old, and started out as a farmhouse. It had been added on to, and at one point, and now some of this is just what I remember being told when I was a kid. So was it all correct? I don't know, but I can only go by what I remember. So I know that at one point it was definitely more than just a house. The bedrooms were all numbered, and in the downstairs there were two separate bathrooms, men's and women's. So it was set up for more than just a house. And what we were told was there was a doctor that lived there, and what I remember being told was that it was for people who suffered from mental illness. So basically a small mental hospital. So the house had a weird energy just in and of itself. And in that house, there were, not just from me, but from multiple people, there were disembodied voices, there was full-blown apparitions, there were shadow people, there were weird knocks and bangs, things would be moved, lights would get turned on, just weird feelings in the house, like you're being watched. Bizarre things. And some of them I didn't know weren't normal because I grew up with it. It's just what I knew. So it took a long time for me to realize that it wasn't normal to be sitting somewhere and see someone walk by you out of the corner of your eye, even though you were sitting there by yourself. That happened all the time in this house. The property was at least at one point two different farms. There was the house that we lived in. There was a barn there that was relatively new in comparison. I think they had stopped farming it in maybe the late 1940s or early 1950s. But before that, on the back side of the property, there was, from the 1800s at least, there was another farm. So there was a barn back there. There was an old house foundation. Looked like the house may have burned down. There was also a couple other small foundations around, and one along what looked like an old road that had grown over that may have been a school. So a lot of history just with that and what would have gone on there. But even before it was farmed, there were Native Americans who lived on the land, I believe Lenape. And one of our neighbors who used to farm that land believed that there was a burial ground on that property somewhere. And the reason why he believed this is that he would, when he used to farm that field and he'd be tilling the soil, every once in a while, he'd churn up some kind of artifact. I never really got too much information on that. He never really spoke about what it was. And I was really young at that time anyway, so I doubt I would have remembered. But the property would very oftentimes, you could be standing in one spot and there would just be these random cold areas. And it didn't matter how hot it was or how cold it was. I could be standing, where I am, and then someone right next to me, then the temperature would be 5-10 degrees different. And you could put your hand in the space of the person who's feeling the cold spot and take your hand out and you could feel it. And then it would just dissipate. Could it be a natural phenomenon? Because there was a pond there, and there was like a valley in the mountain where the creek came through, like I don't want to say canyon, but just like a wash that would come through. So yeah, it's possible it was just a natural thing, but I've never experienced that. I do a lot of hiking. I spend a lot of time outside. I've never experienced that again. And then on top of that, several people, including myself, experienced bizarre light phenomenon on the property where you would see just balls of light. And could that be, again, natural? Could it be swamp gas? Could it be something else? Could be. I'm not saying that it was anything in particular, just saying very weird. And again, I can't say I've never seen that anywhere else. And again, these are things that happen on this property, just don't happen in other areas. So with that all said, I've got experience with experiences. It's not like I cover these topics just out of just interest, out of morbid curiosity. Like, I've never seen anything. I want to know. I do know. And I want to know what it is. But I do approach it from a more skeptical point of view, because there's been a lot of things. When you think things are going to happen, you will notice things that maybe you wouldn't notice. And it's very easy to trick yourself. And I'm not saying this is all cases, or that if you've experienced something, you're just tricking yourself into experiencing. What I'm saying is it is possible to be in an area that does have activity. And I've seen it done, I watch videos and I see people doing investigations and things like this, and they're going there for the experience. So in their brain, they believe they're going to have an experience. Now, some of them are bogus channels, and they're just adding things in, and they're doing it for clicks and views. But some of these groups are legit, and they then find out after they edit and they look at it and go, oh, it was this. Right? But sometimes it is unexplainable. So I know that the human brain can be easily fooled into believing one thing or the other. So with these experiences, I always try to look for a more natural cause, something that can be explained. And if you do that and you can't find any reason, or the reasons that you think you find really make no sense, then you might actually have something unexplained. And I don't like dealing in absolutes, so I never want to say it was absolutely a ghost, or is absolutely an alien, or is absolutely whatever. I tend to keep extraterrestrial life out of paranormal. I think that's its own separate thing. I mean, to our understanding, there's like hundreds of billions of planets that could support life throughout the universe. So the chances of us being the only living creatures in this universe, to me, I think is a very slim, egocentric point of view. I think there's got to be other life somewhere. So extraterrestrial life, I don't think it's paranormal. I think it's normal. I think it's out there somewhere. Is it here and visiting us? I don't know. That I can't say. I've never seen one. I've never seen an alien. I've seen UFOs, UAPs. I've seen unexplainable things in the sky. I couldn't tell you what they were, though. It could be weather balloons. It could be experimental aircraft. It could be natural phenomena. It could be any number of things. Could it be an alien from another planet? Could be. But I can't guarantee it, right? Unless I see it land and they hop out and they say, hi, I'm from, Zeta Reticuli or something like that. Oh, okay, well, now we got an alien. But I think that's separate from paranormal. UFOs, UAP, maybe not. Extraterrestrial life, yeah, I think that's separate. And here's why I say that. UFOs, if you don't know what it is, if you think you see something, and again, I'm not using the phrase "if you think" in a derogatory way, and because I've thought I've seen something with witnesses, and what I've seen and what they've seen at the exact same time, very slightly. And is that just the human brain sucks at recalling detail? Possibly, but there's some things. I'll give you a quick example. I lived in a house in Allentown with some friends growing up. Well, not growing up. We were out of high school. And I lived there for a brief time. And I was upstairs playing a video game. Window open to my back. So I could tell where sound was coming from. If it was coming from in the house or outside. And my other friend was on our back porch where our washer and dryer were. And he was coming in. I was playing the game. And I clearly heard what I thought was him call up the stairs and say, "Hey, Kurt." Well, at the same time, he was downstairs and thought he heard me call out to him, "Hey," we'll just use the name Bob. I don't want to use the actual name. So, "Hey, Bob." So he thought he heard his name. I thought I heard my name. I went to the top of the steps. I looked down the steps just as he was looking up, and we're both like, "What do you want?" And he's like, "You called me." I'm like, "No, you called me." So we went down to the living room where our other two friends were living, or were staying. They weren't living in the living room, but they were hanging out there. And we were like, "Hey, did you hear that? Did you guys call us?" And they're like, "No." And they're like, did you hear that? And what they heard was very nondescript. They just heard like, it was like all warbled and distorted. But we both clearly heard our names, but our names aren't similar. Like I used the name Bob. His name was not a one syllable name like Kurt is. So it shouldn't have been that easy to confuse them. And they're like, you must have heard someone call from outside. And my buddy's like, well, I was coming in from the porch and I know the sound came from inside. And I was like, yeah, well, I was sitting by the window and the window's open and I could tell if it was coming from outside. It clearly came from inside. So we don't know what that was about. But two people, same experience, slightly different. And I think there's a reason for that. I do believe that it is possible that all things like ghosts, if we just want to list them off, ghosts, Bigfoot, Mothman, aliens, and not extraterrestrial life on other planets. We're talking about people who've seen aliens, right? Black-eyed children, men in black, UAP/UFOs, elves, gnomes, skinwalkers, you name it. All these high strangeness kinds of sightings. And especially the ones that are very fleeting, very non-traditional, the people who see Bigfoot walk behind a tree and just never come out the other side and just disappears. And I think that maybe there is a way that if it is a natural phenomenon, it affects the human brain a certain way. Or if it is, maybe people are seeing something more technological in more current times. I'm not saying that way back when, before we really had technology, but maybe somebody figured this out and they know that this can be done. But is it possible that some of these things that we're seeing that are being witnessed aren't actually being witnessed at all? And it's to go back to last week, to the black-eyed kids. A lot of those stories I read where there was a couple in a home and there'd be a knock at the door and one of them would go to the door and be having this conversation with this black-eyed kid, while the other one was in the next room and couldn't hear the conversation, just heard their significant other talking to themselves, even though the black-eyed kid was speaking loud enough that should have been able to be heard in the next room, and then would start like this weird screaming and howl. Maybe there was nobody there. Maybe the black-eyed kid is a projection into the mind of whoever happens to be right there. Now, if the second person would have come closer, maybe they would have been like, oh, I see a black-eyed kid. But would their description have been the same? There are flying triangles. Now, I've mentioned in a previous episode, actually probably a couple previous episodes, that I have witnessed a flying triangle. First question people say is, oh, you sure it wasn't a bomber, like a stealth bomber? I have seen stealth bombers. This was not a stealth bomber. Stealth bombers can't fly at 20 miles an hour and stay in the air. This wasn't witnessed from a great distance. This was maybe 100 feet away and 35 feet up in the air. It flew right over my house. I have a really good gauge of how big this was. It was bigger than my house. It wasn't, tapered and narrow like a bomber. It was a squared off triangle. It was black. It made no sound. Now, there was someone there with me who witnessed it at the same time I did. And for whatever reason, maybe because I didn't actually believe I saw it, I kind of looked at my friend and I was like, you saw that, right? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, describe to me exactly what you just saw. And I had him explain to me exactly what he saw. His recollection was a little bit different. He saw windows. The light configuration was a little different. I had binoculars with me. I looked at it through binoculars from 100 or odd feet away. I got a really good look at it. And I saw no windows. Like the sides were just solid. There's no windows on them. He clearly saw windows, and the light configuration on the bottom was different. And immediately I thought, how can that be possible that within seconds of it being out of our view, are we already having a different recollection of what we saw? In my mind, from the second I saw it, I thought that's either we actually, there's nothing there, and we just somehow hallucinated the same thing, which seems pretty unlikely. There are reports, well, I should say reports, as I do remember growing up, other people in the area having seen a black triangle. And it just kind of became normal. People go, I saw this black triangle fly over, like whatever. And until I saw it, and I was like, oh. But the reports are always slightly different. And now I've got two. I know what I saw, and I know what he's saying he saw, and it's slightly different. So is it possible that whatever it is, whatever that was, I tend to believe it's of human origin. And it's not so much a flying triangle. Maybe it's it could have been a weather balloon, something like that. And it's got a technology that can use whatever frequency, whatever it uses, radio wave or something, to send out a suggestion. And suggestion that it sends out is as simple as can be, right? Just, you're going to see a UFO, or you're going to see a flying triangle. So whoever sees it and is susceptible to that signal, it lets their brain fill in the rest of the information. So what I think is going to be a flying triangle might be slightly different than what he thinks is going to be a flying triangle. And that would explain these stories that I've read and heard on TV shows where one of these things will fly through a more populated area, like following power lines or a river or something like that. And there may be 20 witnesses in an hour. And from those 20 witnesses, there's 20 different descriptions of what the thing looks like. And it immediately does two things. It sparks that interest of what it could be, but then it immediately discredits it because nobody saw the same thing. And if you got all these people seeing something different, what do people say? It wasn't really there. You guys are making this up. It's a hoax. You saw a balloon. You saw a thing. You saw whatever. So it pushes it into the public awareness, but at the same time, it causes disbelief. And is that the point? To me, I think it's the perfect camouflage. Imagine if you've got that technology and you could fly over enemy airspace and make them see a flock of seagulls or an alien mothership. I never really thought of it at that time, but the more I look into stuff, and I've talked a little bit about this Project Bluebeam, that's supposedly this government or NASA plot to use hologram technology to make people see either an alien invasion or the second coming of Christ. Well, maybe that's it. Maybe that is the technology. Maybe I've seen it. Who knows? Or is it more natural? Is it an actual natural phenomenon that just makes you see what you think you want to see? And sometimes that's ghosts, sometimes it's demons, sometimes it's fairies, sometimes it's a UAP. The ones that concern me right now are the ones that we're getting video footage of that actually seem to be there, because I don't think a camera would be susceptible to that. So who knows what that is? I think that those might be our technology, someone on Earth's technology, either a military's or maybe a corporation that's testing some stuff, or maybe a breakaway civilization. But I think it's based from this planet. It's the ones that don't get picked up, the ones where people are taking pictures of it and they're not seeing anything. That really, you take a picture of it and you don't really see what the camera never picks up what you see with your eye. And I think the reason for that is because whatever it is that you're seeing is telling you you're going to see something else. If it's something that's more natural that's causing this, and it would pull or make your brain pull what is in your lexicon, so to speak. So if you're interested in the paranormal, you might see a UFO, or you might see a Bigfoot, or whatever, a black-eyed kid. But if you're more religious, you might see an angel, or you might see a demon. There's that could go a lot of ways. People have different beliefs, so their brain is going to pull from different information. So that's why I think a lot of these things may be, not all, but a lot of these things may be the same phenomenon. It might be just a greater phenomenon that makes your brain pull from these other areas to see what it thinks you want to see, if it even has a thought process behind it. If it is a more natural phenomenon, but it's not, when we think a little bit on a broader scale, there is, with these UAP, seems to be especially with Grush, he talks about there are bodies. They're non-human intelligence. He doesn't want to go as far as say that they're alien, because he doesn't want to assign a place of origin from them. And he talks about interdimensional. If that's the case, if it is interdimensional, and perhaps this natural phenomenon is drawing things through from another dimension, then we could be looking at the same thing where it's all related. We could be seeing, if you're seeing a UFO, it could be a vehicle from another dimension. You're seeing a Bigfoot, it could be a creature from another dimension. Where that starts to get a little bit scary for me is that would mean that a lot of these things are related and the same thing. So a lot of the not really a backstory, but the tendencies of things like elves and aliens and angels and demons all kind of mesh together. And I don't think that if that's the case, any of this is good, because there's a lot of deceit in all those. Part of the conversation we had this weekend was, the reason why the people of the planet aren't being told is because they would freak out, and that the governments are doing it to protect us. I don't think so. I think that if the governments know what's going on, they're not telling us because they know they don't have a defense against it. And I would say that if it was a good force, if it was benevolent, and it was coming here to help the people because it thought that we were in danger, it wouldn't care what government said. Because lying, and we have to assign human logic to this because it's all we know, but lying to your people would be considered bad. So they would say, we don't care if you're going to tell them, we're just going to show up and let the people know. We're going to give you this technology that's going to save your planet. They wouldn't allow it to be monetized or controlled or given to a certain few. If they truly were a benevolent, good race or a good entity, even if it's extraterrestrial, interdimensional, whatever, that wouldn't be the case. If it were angels and they were coming here, they wouldn't listen to the governments of the world. That is so far down their list of authority. Now, I'm not religious, but I would assume that they would take their orders. They would listen to the authority of the beings above them, which would be God. All right, I guess it depends on how you look at that, but yeah, why would they come here and be like, oh, we're supposed to give you this, but we'll let you figure it out because, you've got a government. No, they would just be like, look, this is what's happening. So these entities that come in and portray these good things are the same ones that are coming here and portraying the evil things, and none of it's good. So yeah, if it's all connected that way, that's really bad. Now, I know that some of this might sound a little bit far-fetched. I mean, look at the topics we're talking about. But there's stories of Bigfoots turning into balls of light. Explain that. right? It's not a physical creature. I mean, there was a story that I was told by a stranger on the street years ago that he saw a UFO come down out of the sky in a zigzag pattern, land on top of the mountain behind the old Toys R Us up here in Scranton or Dixon City. And then him and his buddy went up the next night to camp up there, and they saw Bigfoot, actually a family of Bigfoots. And he just knew that the Bigfoot came from the UFO. How does that fit? How does that all go together? I've heard all kinds of crazy stories about how Bigfoot is associated with aliens. But then some people think Bigfoots are these beings of light that are here to help us. And some people think that they're, flesh and blood creatures that are just out to, they're looking for food or whatever, and that they'll communicate with you and leave you gifts if you leave them gifts, but then also come and knock on your house. There's so many stories if we're just looking at that one thing of Bigfoot. But then when you look at if you change the name from Bigfoot to aliens, some people think aliens are here to help us, and some people think aliens are here to steal our cattle, and or that we're here as their crop or whatever. All right. Some people think they're good. Some people think they're bad. Why? Why is there this big diversity in their, and we're not talking about different races of aliens. We're talking about like the little grays. Like some people think they're great. Some people think they're evil. You look fairy stories, fae folk. They're playful and sometimes they're helping people, but they also will trick you into their world, and you'll be stuck there forever, or they'll get you lost, or they're going to terrify you. There's always these extremes of their behavior, and it depends on the story, depends on the person. Is that because it really does depend on the person? Is the phenomenon completely relative to the person? They're going to experience it their way, regardless of how they see it. It's going to be the same interaction. It's not a perfect theory or a perfect idea. I grant you that. There's a lot of flaws. There's a lot of questions left open. But it's the one that I'm working with now because of what I've seen, what I've heard, from people personally, and from watching, videos and listening to podcasts and reading books. To me, it seems like it's all the same thing, because it all wants to be known, but it also wants to be disbelieved. Now, like I said in the beginning, growing up in the house and the property that I did, there was a lot of experiences, and it wasn't just limited to one genre of experience. The weird lights outside, disembodied voices inside. It was a mishmash of experiences, and I think that if it is an intelligence, if the phenomenon is something natural and it's got an intelligence behind it, once someone is open to it, then it just keeps showing. Because if you're a credible person and you have one experience, one thing happens, and you tell your story, people are like, oh, maybe there's something to that. But if you have experiences across the spectrum, sure, people might still believe you, but they're going to start to go, why are you having so many experiences? This doubt's going to start to come in. Why are you seeing all this and no one else? I believe it's intentional. I believe that people who have an experience, who might be credible enough to actually get the word out, just keep getting shown things. And a lot of times it just keeps getting crazier and crazier and crazier and crazier, because who's going to believe it? There's a story I have that I just don't talk about. There's a handful of people that know about it, but it's so crazy. It's so weird. It's so involved that I know if I tell this story, I'm a nut. And when I think about it, I go, no, you know what? I know what happened. People that witnessed some of it, I talked to, and talking to them, I know what happened. But in my mind, I'm still like, did that really happen? Was that really a thing? Am I remembering this correctly? Did my brain fill in something? I don't know. But I know that it does seem to be intentional sometimes, that people will just be handed such a crazy experience that no one will ever believe it. People will listen and they'll be intrigued and they'll be interested, but there's always that little, at least a little shadow of doubt from people, because they're like, really? Did that really happen? Did you really, did that really happen that way? And I think it thrives on that. If it is a natural phenomenon, I believe it thrives on that because it needs energy, and we are energy, right? Everything is energy. Matter is energy. Everything is just a form of energy. So in order to draw certain energy out of people, maybe it needs certain emotions. And doubt is an emotion, right? Skepticism. Or maybe it's not even that. Maybe it's the feeling that generates in the person who experienced it, who now feels, kind of ostracized because of what happened to them. Maybe it's that. Maybe it's not the disbelief, but maybe it's the feeling from the other side that it feeds on. I don't know. What do you guys think about that? And if you've had an experience, what was your experience after it? The experience after the experience. Did you tell anybody? Did they believe you? Did more things happen? Did it seem like one experience triggered more? I'd really be interested to hear about that. And again, like I said, anything in that realm, if you want it anonymous, it'll stay anonymous. Not looking to out anybody on this stuff. I just do find it interesting. And I do believe that it's good to talk about it, even if it's, if you're not ready to, go to the world and say, hey, this was me that this happened to. Maybe the story alone is enough to help somebody else out. Again, you can send me that information at podcast@primitivintelligence.com. Love to hear it. And like I said, these are stories that could help somebody else out who maybe had something happen, maybe had an experience, and is having a hard time dealing with it, or dealing with the backlash from it after telling people that they saw it. So let me know. That's going to do it for me for this week. It's a little bit shorter episode. Like I said, just flying off the hip, no notes. And I'm pretty sure I touched on everything I wanted to. If not, I'll bring it up in another episode. Hope you guys are enjoying the season so far. Having a lot of fun doing it. Do have a couple things that I'm working on that I'd like to get put together for a really decent, good episode, good crazy episode. And if you guys have something in particular you'd like to hear me talk about or look into, let me know at the podcast@primitivintelligence.com, and I'll look into it and see what I can find. But until then, enjoy the rest of your week. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. See ya.